We would encourage you to trust your instincts and prioritize your emotional safety during this video. You may have your own insights into what is helpful or unhelpful during times of distress. Please be mindful of your personal boundaries when reflecting and sharing experiences.
So I'm Alex Hunter. I was a peer support worker for many years in the voluntary sector, but worked alongside the NHS delivering peer support in secondary mental health. I then went on to be head of peer support training and counselling there. But I left about a year ago, and I am currently a With You associate. So I facilitate peer support worker training, supervision training, and I also work with a couple of organisations, endpoint assessment organisations, for the peer support apprenticeship. Yeah, well, from the very start as a peer support worker, I suppose that was always forefront in my mind because of my experience of services, which was a while ago now, but I was never asked anything about whether the support I was getting was actually beneficial. Which I just always found quite bizarre, and I always felt like my voice was silenced as a service user. So when I started as a peer support worker about 6 years ago, I was quite astonished that the service user voice was not there as much as it should be. I was also studying for a master's in mental health recovery and social inclusion, which was basically all about getting the service user voice through everything. I see the benefit of, if we're talking peer and professional, so peers and people with lived experience meeting with professionals and I suppose co-producing things together. I mean, its benefit is shared learning for both, isn't it? I mean, that's, the ideal thing is that actually you may come to that, and which is why I like the 4PI, the National Service User Network Standards 4PI, because basically you can share a principle, you can share, we want to achieve this. So for example, I was part of a co-produced group at my local NHS when I was there, and we had a common goal that we wanted to set up a group for people who had severe mental illness outside of the clinical setting, that was facilitated by a psychiatrist but also somebody with lived experience. And it sounds really easy. I thought, oh, come on, we just do it. But obviously there's lots of clinical governance, which I didn't really understand at the time. I'm like, well, why can't people sit in a room and chat, But obviously a psychiatrist has a duty of care, that clinical governance that I didn't understand. So I learned such a lot over an 8-month period working with other different mental health professionals of how to set this group up. And the shared learning and I guess the shared understanding. So for me, if I look at the benefit that had for me, professionally, I learned a lot, but also personally, because I was sat in a room with 2 psychiatrists every month for like a year, and I never would have been able to do that before because I had such, it would have been such a triggering thing for me, having my experience in mental health care. So in terms of the wider, so for people, so for peers, I suppose, thinking about whether you're working as a peer support worker or you're a service user and you've got your experience, your lived experience that way, it really does help you build confidence. It helps you kind of, I guess, see that sometimes mental health professionals are not the enemy, that actually you've got allies. So you're not, I've got a real big kind of, I guess, activism stance in it all. I'm always trying to change things and improve things. And sometimes it feels like you're trying to do it alone as a peer and that people don't understand that. But when you sit in a room and you've got this shared purpose, you realise that there are allies, there are other professions, there are people who may not identify with having a lived experience that do still believe that your voice is valid and should be heard and, will support you in that. So that's amazing for confidence and for well-being and for recovery. I mean, the skills you build up is amazing as well. And I'd say in terms of for professionals, I guess what I've been told is that it changes their practice in terms of they can see that sometimes they may have stigmatizing, discriminating attitudes towards people with lived experience. I'd say especially if somebody has had a lived experience for a long time and is deemed as chronically or severely unwell, they might, you know, again, working in those intense environments, you get this, well, people aren't going to recover. And I think when you work alongside professionals and are still, if you're a peer and still open and honest about maybe sometimes I struggle, maybe sometimes I'll have a dip, they can see that there's still a lot of strength and value, and you know, so that kind of changes their attitudes. So I think that's just beneficial all round. And of course, services are better because you've got everybody's perspective going into making it a great service. So how can I actually still change things? And it is about getting the allies. It is about working alongside people, you know, mental health professionals, service users, any you know, and actually creating this sort of core group that maybe want the same thing but have different perspectives, and listening to everybody's perspective. Because I think at the start I'd be like, well, that's no, I'm, you know, the way I believe it is right. And it's, you know, you can have different perspectives and both be right in a way. There's no one single truth to things. Sometimes when you're very open and vocal about that, there can be lots of challenges. And I'm not saying that challenges are a bad thing, but it can be sometimes quite detrimental for your well-being if you feel like you're the only lone voice. So I guess it's about, you know, sticking to your values, even if sometimes, so for example, you know, I was part of multidisciplinary team meetings a lot, and if I heard things like this person X, Y, and Z is not compliant with their medication, or this person is being manipulative, or this person is not engaging in services, my immediate reaction to that is to challenge, because they're all very discriminatory language that should not be used. But if I did that all the time, I would be the person that's stopping these things. So I kind of had to learn that if I do want to get people on board, collaborate, have allies, get people to understand the peer voice, I had to sometimes hold back from how, and take my, I guess, my triggering, if it was a trigger, to things like supervision and talk in my peer networks. And I guess with my, so I think it's sometimes, again, working alongside other professions is so important for service development, but I think you sometimes need just your peer networks to actually be able to offload on, to kind of go, oh my goodness, you know, because otherwise you are seen as the, I suppose, too challenging. I mean, I don't think that, I would never agree that peers are too challenging, but you can be seen as that, and then your voice is not heard because you're othered again. You're kind of like, you know, and I think you have to be, I can't remember who was saying about it, almost like a critical friend in those sort of, you know, peer and professional networks. So, you know, I am going to say when I feel like this maybe needs to be changed, but I'm not, also, I would say the important thing with it is not to just say, so there's a difference between speaking out about things that you can see that are wrong in mental health services or health and social care in general, or across the justice system, all of those things, and saying, well, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, this needs to be changed. But there's you also need to come up with ways that it can be changed, and that desire and that kind of ability to problem solve alongside others, and also know that there are limitations and things don't always happen overnight, I'd say. And as I say, I mean, you know, again, that there's lots of I'd say as well also, so one of the things I did and again, I hope it was successful. I know what I think it was, but you know, as you go, sort of, I went up from peer support and was head of peer support, and I never changed in the whole, I am still going to use my vulnerability as a strength. So if I'm sitting in a meeting and I feel like my lived experience is relevant, alongside the fact I now have experience in setting up services and budgets and, you know, all the things you kind of learn you have to do as a head, alongside that, I'm still going to use it. I'm still going to speak about my lived experience in a way that will hopefully change opinions. And yeah, just because it's important. I think, you know, I know people would challenge me sometimes on that, you know, but I also think it was important for me because I'm only in mental health because I've got a lived experience. I wouldn't be there otherwise. I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, and I would never want to be. I simply went into it later on in life as a peer because I had this kind of, do you know what? I think I've got a lot to give because of that. So I'm not going to stop talking about it. I'm not going to stop sort of using my recovery as a strength, you know.
Thank you. Actually, you're like a wealth of knowledge. It's just it's absolutely wonderful. It's like I said, I've got lists of things that I want people to say, and it blows me away. I think it's a general thing with peer support that people really want the best for everyone else. So that comes across in language.
I was delivering training yesterday, and somebody said that it was so refreshing, because they go up into breakout rooms, and she was like, I thought I was the only one that went into peer support to obviously support people because you want to, but actually because I want to change things, and that's where, you know, that activism, I know things need to be changed and I want to be part of that. And it's about signing up. I guess if you're peer support and I always talk about anybody peer support is a leader at any level. Doesn't matter whether you've got a title of coordinator or manager or whatever, you are a leader just by being there. And, you know, you kind of have signed up mainly because you want things to change. And whether that's talking out, you know, quietly to one person and saying what you feel needs to be changed, or whether it's speaking out at meetings or writing presentations, you are leading change. And that's so important.